woman's head. Brett, the only one of the three with a record and outstanding misdemeanors, was granted immunity from prosecution for his participation on that night. But he had flat out told police that Erik himself had struck Julie Ybanez in the attack multiple times and that he knew that Nate was going to kill his mother before he did it. Even though he'd lied to the police in the past repeatedly and also performed poorly on a polygraph examination, the prosecutors still considered him a credible witness. Brett's allegations led to Erik being arrested again and held on upgraded charges of complicity in murder and conspiracy to commit murder. In exchange for future testimony that prosecutors hoped would lead to 2 slam-dunk convictions, Brett had the juvenile sentence he was currently serving for reckless endangerment and harassment shortened, and he wasn't charged with violating parole. As Erik's attorney stalled the start of trial, pressing the DA for a plea deal for manslaughter or second-degree murder, a calamity was brewing nearby. On April 20th, 1999, Erik Harris and Dylan Klebold opened fire on their high school, Columbine High, right there in Littleton, Colorado, 20 minutes or so from Highlands Ranch and the city where Erik Jensen's parents still resided. The Columbine massacre consumed their community, and Erik's case sped to trial with any hopes of a plea agreement wiped away. Erik himself said that there was no sympathy to be found at that time for a rich white boy involved in murder. Although Nate Ybanez was adamant that he alone had killed his mother, Erik Jensen was convicted of felony murder and received life in prison without parole. His attorney attempted to convince the jury that the teen had smoked so much marijuana that night that he was too high to react properly. However, it had no effect on the ultimate verdict. Once the fall of 1999 came around, Nate Ybanez went to trial, with the 3-day proceedings being covered gavel to gavel on cable's infamous old-school channel, Court TV, with the title, Teen on Trial for Killing His Mom. Day 1, trial began and the jury was picked. On day 2, all trial testimony took place, and on day 3, 90 minutes of deliberation led to his guilty verdict and mandatory sentence of life without parole for the first-degree murder charge. The DA's office had direct filed Nate's case, so they alone had made the decision to try him as an adult. His attorney made no statements to the press about the case, called no witnesses to bolster a defense, nor did the defendant testify on his own behalf. The defense asserted that it was his friends who made him think that he was suffering abuse and that Erik's conversation with Nate after work on that night prompted him to kill. In a move that could be considered confusing, Nate's father paid for his lawyer but then testified against him. The state called 9 witnesses on the second day of trial, including Roger Ybanez and Brett Baker, who, even though he wasn't there, still testified about things he claimed Nate and Erik told him. None of Nate's family members who wanted to testify about the abuse were allowed to, and no expert witnesses were called because none had been hired and no evaluations had been done. Nate told Frontline that he truly felt that everyone involved's intentions were to send him quietly to prison for the rest of his life. And that's exactly what they almost did. An amicus brief filed in June of 2015 outlines how Roger Ybanez testified that his son had become a, quote, bad kid through his teenage years. Brett Baker testified that Nate had told him while at work that night that he planned to kill his parents, and that Erik told him after the murder that he had hit Julie 3 times, one of those times with such force that the weapon got stuck in the woman's head. He also alleged that when he arrived at the apartment following the murder, it was Erik Jensen that choreographed the scene cleanup and evidence disposal, and that he was aware of Nate's plans for murder. Though his attorney had implored at closing that he be found guilty of second-degree murder, he also bolstered the false assertion that Nate's friends had somehow encouraged him to commit the murder, and that something was just wrong with Nate.
These kids have a hole in their soul, ladies and gentlemen. You could drive a truck through it.
No issue was made of any abuse allegations other than to mock them, even when Roger Ybanez testified about being abusive. No one in the court intervened, even when the man paying for Nate's defense could be heard on the confession tape leaving the interrogation, calling his son a fuckface and a piece of shit. Only after he'd left did Nate speak to police, though his father was required to be there. Regarding the allegations of sexual abuse against Nate's father, he's quoted in the Denver Post as saying, "I definitely deny all of that." Family members came forward who had witnessed threatening physical behavior toward both his son and his wife and alleged that the verbal abuse was just as prevalent. And Nate's father admitted to that on the stand. He also acknowledged that he and his wife threw things at Nate, spanked him with a wooden spoon, and pushed him around like into walls as early as 3 years of age. However, said in the same article, quote, "Like every parent, you may see something like that, but I'm saying it was a more rare occasion. His friends convinced him he was being abused." Roger's sister, though, pointed out that their parents had physically abused him as a child and that, quote, "there are traits that can be passed down." The autumn cool down is in full effect, and I've been really enjoying chilling outside and playing Best Fiends. The combination screams take a break, and the great weather we've had here in Phoenix is making it too easy to take it easy. When I'm not taking it easy, I'm working, and that's when Best Fiends does its other job for me, giving my brain a few minutes off from murder. There's new levels, events, and challenges added frequently, ensuring not a moment of boredom once these adorable bugs and creepy slugs invade your spare time. I can't wait to see what the holiday seasons have in store for our favorite characters, and with 5,000 increasingly challenging levels to play ahead of me, I know I'm in for a binging good time. 100 million downloads can't be wrong. Download Best Fiends free today on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends. And this is not the first time that an abused child had fled this family either. Per published reports, an aunt of Nate Ybanez went missing on June 13, 1973, after living for about 18 months with a foster family in Bettendorf, Iowa. 16-year-old Maria Lena Ybanez, a sister of Nate's father, had been placed in foster care by the court due to not getting along with their father, Bernardo. Their parents were in the midst of a divorce at the time. It was evident that the sophomore at Betancourt High School looked forward to reuniting with her mother. She was adjusting at school, was dating a neighborhood boy, and had plenty of girlfriends. One of them recalled that on June 13, 1973, the two girls split a 12-pack, hitchhiked around, then partied with some guys before parting ways. She also remembered that Maria and her foster parents had fought when she got home, an occurrence which seemed to be increasing with time. Around 12:30 a.m. on June 13th, her foster parents reported that Maria left the house with no shoes and was never seen alive again. According to IowaColdCases.com, on the day Maria disappeared, she could have been at a family funeral with her mother and other relatives but couldn't get time off from work. Her 5-year-old cousin had been struck by a car and hospitalized for several days before succumbing to her injuries. When her mother returned from Tennessee following her niece's funeral, it was a confusing situation. Maria's foster mother called her biological mother when she returned the following day. Then she filed a missing persons report. And the women, plus Maria's former boyfriend, would check back from time to see if there was ever any news. When a skeleton was found on November 5, 1977, positioned face down with a hand behind its back, The bones were examined by notable experts in institutions including the Smithsonian, where it was determined that hairline cracks in the bones of the neck were indicative of the application of force. But what they did not have was an identity. So 3 months later, investigators released some pertinent details to the media, including pictures of 3 rings found with the bones. When the ex-boyfriend of Maria Ybanez saw them, he was confident that they had finally found her and called from his home in California to tell their mothers the news. Ybanez family members would for years contend that Nate's grandfather was a jealous, violent, and abusive alcoholic who would mostly target his wife, son Roger, and oldest daughter Maria, and his criminal record backs those claims. Maria was allegedly scheduled to testify against him in her parents' contentious divorce case, and the threat that she would speak about the abuse they endured while under oath could have been a reason to kill, their family thought. And so did the police. Local law enforcement even said when interviewed that they believed that Nate's grandfather strangled his daughter to death and left her in a ditch that night she allegedly ran away. But they could never prove it, and decades later, Bernardo Ybanez died just a few months before his grandson Nate went to trial in 1999. He had offered a reward for his daughter's murderer's arrest and prosecution that has never been paid out, and the murder of Maria Elena Ybanez is considered a cold case. It wasn't until years after Nate and Erik went to prison that any investigation into the boys' accusations of parental abuse in the Ybanez home even began. It was the attorney working on Erik's appeal who felt like Nate seemed like an abuse victim. He set in motion evaluations with a forensic psychologist who, through multiple techniques and methods and multiple months, encouraged Nate to bring his memories of abuse closer to the surface. In 2003, Nate signed an affidavit attesting to the fact that he and he alone killed his mother, and even testified at Erik's appeal hearing, to no avail. It wasn't until after the Miller decision in 2012 that Nate and Erik would start to see some momentum building toward their possible release. Nathan Ybanez, at age 36, received a sentence commutation from then-Governor John Hickenlooper in December of 2018. He's scheduled for release on December 1st, 2020, age 38. Regarding his mother's murder, he told the Denver Post, quote, "I was in a place where no one should ever be, where there was no hope, and I felt completely trapped on the verge of death. I was broken. I had no control. I think now, if only I was smarter, if only I could have figured out a different way to end the pain." Erik Jensen was not on Hickenlooper's list of 33 prisoners. However, he'd receive a new sentencing hearing 5 months later, saying in court that day, quote, "What I really did is I sat 3 feet away from someone who was dying. I sat 3 feet away from her, and I didn't save her. I could have. I told myself a whole bunch of lies back in the day, that there's no way I could have saved her, but I for sure could have. I for sure could have stopped that. I could have stopped it before it even happened, and I didn't. Then afterwards, just to make it worse, I tried to cover it all up, to cover up my shame. I'm going to be the leader and the good man that I always say that I was." He was resentenced to 40 years to life this time, with the judge telling him to keep up his near-spotless prison record, saying, quote, "I don't want you to take from this to mean that nothing you've done is important." Then, on December 23, 2019, current governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, commuted Erik Jensen's sentence after a push from his appellate attorneys. The governor issued a letter which read in part, quote, "As of the date of this letter, you've served over 21 years in prison. The crimes you were convicted of are serious. Nonetheless, I believe you deserve parole for several reasons. Your case manager described you as a model inmate and testified that he would have no concerns if you were to move in next door to him."
I'm just thankful for the opportunity, and I'm just trying to honor what has been done for me.
Erik Jensen was released in March 2020, and Nathan Ybanez awaits his release in December of 2020.